Hey, it's the Comics Kid 2099, and I'm here to review something for you. This is a mini-series from a while back. Ultimate Daredevil Elektra. Let me see if I can pull this back. This is drawn by Salvador Rucka. I really love Salvador Larroca's art here. Sometimes his art is hit or miss with me. Whenever he's trying to draw his characters to explicitly resemble certain actors, I don't really care for that. This is phenomenal artwork. I almost think you could buy this book just for the art. I usually don't do that. I'm much more of a story guy. There are only a couple of people out there who I will buy the books just for their art. Usually Larroca's not one of them, but this is some great art. If you've seen Larroca before, you know how great he is. This miniseries, it was 4 issues long. This came out, I want to say, around 2003. I was in junior high when this first came out, and I remember buying most of it in singles. The comic book shop had one of them that didn't come, so I only had 3 of the 4 issues for the longest time. I didn't know this until now, probably because at the time I didn't know this writer's name. But this series was written by Greg Rucka, who does, as you probably know, really great crime-driven stories. He's done some indie work. I don't remember what all it's called, but there's one series he's done, Queen and Country, very espionage, crime-type series. He's also done some Batman-related comics that are very street-level, crime-centric. And this is kind of along those lines. It's not quite as crime-y as the Batman stuff that he's done, but it's in that same ballpark. If you're familiar with the Ultimate Universe, you may be aware that Daredevil had actually appeared before this miniseries in Ultimate Marvel Team-Up. And I believe he very briefly appeared in Ultimate X-Men when Brian Michael Bendis was writing the book. So this miniseries is actually a prequel to all of Daredevil and all of Elektra's appearances in the Ultimate Universe. Both of these characters are in college here, and when we see Daredevil in Ultimate Marvel Team-Up, he's actually an adult lawyer who has his own firm and everything. So this is set sometime in the vague distant past. We're not exactly sure how long ago it's set, and really it doesn't really matter how long ago it's set. The story is as follows. Elektra Natchios, she's basically just a normal girl. She knows karate and some other martial arts, and she's also a pretty strong-headed feminist, and then her roommate is also along these same lines. And other than that, she's, your normal girl, and they very quickly encounter the villain of the piece, Calvin Langstrom III, who is called Trey. I'm not sure why. And then they also encounter Matt Murdock, who's in pre-law. For those of you who don't read comic books, these 2 characters are the ones on the cover who are playing tongue hockey. That is Daredevil and Elektra. One thing I wasn't crazy about with this book, it focuses way too much on Elektra's side of things, and I wish with this being titled Daredevil and Elektra, that it had really been more of a split between those 2 characters getting about even screen time. I really do like Elektra's arc here. I just feel like it could have been a much stronger book if we had had just as much time spent with Daredevil as we get to see him go through his arc. The arc that I'm referring to is that Elektra meets a girl, and her name is Melanie. And at some point early in the book, Melanie, it's strongly hinted that she's raped by this Calvin III guy. At no point in the book does it actually mention the word rape. So when I was in junior high, I actually didn't pick up on this, but in rereading it, it's pretty obvious that you can tell what's happened. This guy, he's basically just a scumbag. He treats women like garbage, and in a way, he's really kind of cartoonishly depicted. I'm sure I'm definitely certain that there are people in the world who are like this. It's just that I don't think that they would quite come off as this much of a jerk upon first meeting them. I think it would take a long time to realize, hey, this guy's kind of an idiot, and he's not really very smart, and not really a very nice guy either. So it could be that in the span of 4 issues, we don't really have a lot of time for Elektra to say, oh yeah, that Trey guy, he's a scumbag. So we have to kind of just set them up as hating each other right from the start. And it seems a little goofy, but I'm kind of okay with it because, like I said, this is 4 issues and we don't have a lot of time to deal with stuff like that. So after Melanie is raped by this Trey guy, We then see Elektra watch as the law tries to take care of this, but then she's very angry, and rightfully so, that the police are basically ordered from on high to back off. And this is really what sets Elektra on her arc in this story. She begins to see that the law is pretty much useless when it applies to people who have enough money to throw around. And of course, this is kind of the antithesis to who Daredevil is. Matt Murdock, he's a lawyer. Of course he has to believe in the law. Now, interestingly enough, I wouldn't really call this book a superhero story, even though on the cover, they're very explicitly wearing their costumes, and it's actually like that on each cover. But in the story itself, it's just a couple of college kids, and they're kind of trying to figure things out for themselves. It's really not a story about superheroes, or even superpowers, really. You don't get to see the origin of Daredevil's powers. You don't really get to see him fighting any big villains of any kind. The biggest villain we have here is Trey himself, and he's just a jerk who rapes a girl. It's not really a Kingpin or Bullseye or anything like that. It's just a guy, a normal villain that you could have in the real world. So in theory, Elektra's arc should be, she gets to see that the law basically doesn't work for people like Trey, and then she kind of becomes a villain as she decides that she's going to kill him, because as far as she's concerned, justice outweighs the law. And as far as I'm concerned, Elektra's arc is very well handled. It's very, very good to see her go from this kind of innocent girl to a more hardened girl who's seen all these things happen to her friend, and she basically understands that things are never going to get better unless she takes things into her own hands and kills this guy. And it's great that she doesn't just jump to that conclusion early on. She actually does want the police to handle things a couple of times, and when that doesn't work, she finally just decides that she's going to get her hands dirty. And she doesn't like it. I really enjoy that she's not, a mustache twirling, I'm going to kill this guy because that's the only way it will work. You can very easily see that she's conflicted, and I really love the way Rucka and Rucka have handled that. However, I really don't think that Matt Murdock gets enough screen time here. We can see here that he definitely believes in the law, but I think that he really needed to have a little bit more screen time here so that we could see his arc of coming to an understanding that while the law is definitely important, hence him being a law student, he also needs to understand that sometimes you need to work outside of the law. We see in some of his other appearances in the Ultimate Universe that he is a vigilante, so clearly he came to this understanding at some point in his life, but we don't get to see his arc here. And since this is titled Ultimate Daredevil and Elektra, I really do wish that we could have seen both of their arcs kind of parallel each other and see these characters go down different paths. The core of these two arcs are definitely present, but unfortunately it's really only Elektra's that's given any screen time, while Matt is kind of relegated to the background. At some points, I would even say that Elektra's two roommates are actually given more screen time than Daredevil himself, and I kind of feel like that's a problem. As I said earlier, this really isn't a superhero story. This is a human story. And if you really love superhero stories with supervillains and superheroes flying with super strength, punching each other, destroying cities, you're not going to get that here. If you love relationships and building of character and growth and, de-evolution of character, depending on what you think of Elektra's arc, then you will like this story. Usually I'm not a fan of these human stories, and I feel like this one actually does a very good job of handling itself. I like it despite its lack of science fiction and fantastical elements, which are usually what draws me to a story. As far as I'm concerned, in the Ultimate Universe, you have two jobs ahead of you whenever you're introducing a character who really hasn't made an appearance in the Ultimate Universe. One, you have to make this character understandable to a new audience. When I was first getting into comics, primarily I only read Ultimate stuff because I really didn't understand what all was going on in the 40, 50-something titles outside of the Ultimate Universe. So this is really a place where you need to make these characters recognizable to people who may be coming in contact with them for the first time, such as I was with this miniseries. However, you also need to make these characters different in some way. If Ultimate Daredevil isn't in any way different from Marvel 616 Daredevil, then there's really no reason from this guy who's already reading Marvel 616 Daredevil to then go and buy this Ultimate miniseries. However, right now, I don't really read Daredevil or Elektra, so I can say that this miniseries engaged me. I'm not entirely sure it would have the same effect on somebody who is reading Daredevil and is very familiar with the character of Elektra in the Marvel Universe. Once I've read some more stories featuring those two characters outside of the Ultimate Universe, I might have a different opinion. But right now, as I said, if you really like these human-type stories with relationships in the forefront, I would definitely say that you should probably give this story a read. As I said, this really isn't a superhero story, and in fact, in this story, there's really not any costumes that appear, except for at the very end, where Elektra basically puts on a costume that resembles what she's wearing right here. And it's not really explained why she's wearing a costume. Earlier, she just put on black and snuck into someone's room. And I kind of feel like for the end of the story, that's what she should have been wearing. There was really no reason for her to be wearing this strange-looking assassin costume that resembles what she wears in the Marvel Universe. Since we do know that later on she had her own miniseries in the Ultimate Universe, I think that could have been a great place to turn her into more of the character that we later saw in Ultimate Spider-Man. I don't think she actually had to put on her costume here. My only other real complaint that I had about this book was the first time that Elektra sees Daredevil, he's working out in a gym. Now very clearly he is doing things that absolutely a blind person is incapable of doing. You know, swinging around and doing flips and stuff on the trapeze bars, which are things that somebody who is incapable of sight just wouldn't be able to do. And strangely enough, Elektra and her two friends don't really see anything wrong with this. But then later, after Elektra's been attacked by Matt, who's wearing black and a mask outside, she seems to have this impression that maybe it's Matt. And suddenly, she has this idea that he's faking his blindness. But then, he plays it really cool, and she understands, okay, maybe he's not faking his blindness. It's just strange that she has this suspicion, and then so very quickly, nothing is done with it, and it just seems to me like she should have known all along that there was something interesting about him, because he's a blind guy who's able to do all these incredible things. Other than that, though, I really did enjoy this book.